think what we're doing is very important. That September the 11th has changed the lives of everyone, particularly us in law enforcement. When this first happened, everybody was shocked, they were scared, they were angry, and then confused. And I think today, this entire country is all for those things. And I think what we in law enforcement have to understand is that this is not the destruction of a store. This is a war against the United States of America. And we in law enforcement are going to be the first responders.
We have to realize that terrorism works, and terrorism is easy. It's inexpensive. It's cheap. It has huge lasting effects on society.
I think in law enforcement until 9/11, we were fairly naive about terrorism. It was radical groups it was internal terrorism, and it was always something that happened overseas. It was something that happened in Middle Asia or in the Middle East. It was things that we looked at and always said may come here, but we never looked at it at a local level. I think 9/11's brought home the fact that it will happen, and it can happen at a local level. These cells are living within our community, they live within our community at large, and they can be anywhere in the state of California. So law enforcement officers have to realize that these people are amongst us now.
In past incidents, there have been many patterns and indicators prior to the incident actually occurring. Officers nowadays have to be able to better respond to and recognize those indicators and those actions prior to the incident, so hopefully we can interdict that incident before it actually occurs.
You might have 10,000 things happen, and only one of those could lead to a terrorist incident, but if we're not aware, and if we don't look for things that could possibly cause it, then we're kind of missing the boat, because terrorism is our newest, biggest realized crime and threat.
The purpose of terrorism. There is almost always a strategy behind terrorist actions. Whether it takes the form of bombings, shootings, hijackings, or assassinations, terrorism is neither random, spontaneous, nor blind. It is a deliberate use of violence against civilians for political or religious ends. Even though most people can recognize terrorism when they see it, experts have had difficulty coming up with an ironclad definition. The State Department defines terrorism as premeditated, politically motivated violence perpetrated against non-combatant targets by subnational groups or clandestine agents, usually intended to influence an audience.
There are plenty of specific definitions, stock definitions from the FBI and other agencies. I prefer a simple one. Terrorism is the use of violence, the threat of violence, to induce fear, and that fear is meant to coerce a change in policies, in government, for political, social, or religious reasons. That change may be to change policies, as I said. It may be simply to remove a government. It may be to stop a practice. For political reasons, to change a government, from a democratic government to a socialist government or any other kind, from a secular government to a religious government.
The point is to use the psychological impact of violence or the threat of violence to affect political change.
As we teach people how to be counter-terrorists, terrorists around the world are teaching people how to be terrorists. And therefore, they get better at what they're doing the longer they exist. They not only get better, but they get more lethal, because the frustration to achieve the goals in early terrorist acts leads them to become more desperate and do larger scale terrorist activities.
Unable to achieve their unrealistic goals by conventional means, terrorists attempt to send an ideological or religious message by terrorizing the general public. Through the choice of their targets, which are often symbolic or representative of the targeted nation, terrorists attempt to create a high-profile impact on the public of their targeted enemy or enemies with their act of violence. In doing so, they hope to demonstrate various points, such as that the targeted government cannot protect its own citizens, or that by assassinating a specific victim, they can teach the general public a lesson about espousing viewpoints or policies other than their own.
Terrorism exists and has existed through the ages as a tool for people who have no other way to make themselves heard. They perhaps don't believe in the government, or they have no other voice. A ballot box doesn't work for them. They don't have the strength to fight through force of arms against a larger dominant government, or a dominant race perhaps, if it's an ethnic conflict. So they choose terrorism as a way to make themselves heard, to make their cause heard.